Yeah, welcome to part two of this short trilogy, and here Rick is explaining how we always focus on the effects of the comet on Britain and how that forced people out. It also had an effect on the other side of the Atlantic. So if you haven't seen part one, don't worry, you don't need it for this video, but it would help if you do watch it. And then in part three, we'll go on to deal with more artifacts and problematic evidence and what was done with it.
Later Irish, St. Brendan as one example. Prince Madoc. I don't know if you know the tale of Prince Madoc.
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
Oh yeah, you know that.
Yeah. I'm working on a book at the moment, so that's one of the reasons I got you on, Rick. Yeah.
Yes. So
and Madoc, yeah.
Yeah, and his half brother too.
Yeah, the big Arthur.
Well, since we've already segued there, Lee Pennington and Lee said, hey, I would like to go see a cave, but I'm not sure I can do it alone. So myself and another adventurer, if you will, said, Lee, we guarantee you we'll get you in and out of that cave safely. And we did a couple of times, in fact. But Lee didn't make it to the burial pit because it's a low crawl through a 19-inch space.
Yeah,
and
yeah, I would be very keen. I've had a couple of offers to go down caves with harnesses and all that kind of stuff. I will do it. I mean, COVID was an escape for me actually on that one.
But the cyst, that's the only thing I can call it, a burial cyst in this cave. It's powder dry, would serve that purpose absolutely perfectly of desiccating Arthur's body, and there are other factors in there that make it my choice.
The actual site. Oh, right, that is exciting. Yes, yeah.
And it's called the Welsh Caves in Alabama. So I don't know where else you would take that, but and it's 100 feet up from the bottom and 30 feet down from the top of this cliff, with a path that in places is about that wide.
Wow.
But we got Lee in and out. He was happy with that.
Well done, you. Well done, Lee. Yeah, yeah. I'll have to see the pictures from that one, I think.
Well, what we found, one of the things we found on that trip to that cave is above the main entrance, there is a carving in the rock. And I don't know if I actually have a writing instrument handy, but it's Arthur's A, if you will. It's got the A and then it's got the cross like this, but it also has a tail coming down. Arthur's buried here. That's how I interpret that. He's not buried there now.
Yeah, because that A with the sort of V-shaped crossbar, as it were, that turns up a lot, doesn't it? That's
yes,
good observation.
It turned up at Tintagel. It turned up at St. Peter's Church. It turns up in a whole bunch of Colburn writings of the period. So yeah, it also showed up in a couple of other places that surprised me. One of the places it showed up is Joseph Smith's what do you call it? Modified Egyptian alphabet.
Yeah, Joseph Smith keeps coming up. I'm having to have a rethink about the whole Mormon thing. I mean, it used to seem crazy that they could find something in a cave with writing on it, and then the more you look into all the people who went across there and the writing they had, and suddenly, hey, I still don't know if it's true or not, but it doesn't sound so crazy anymore, does it?
It certainly is intriguing. Compelling even, maybe. And the whole Prince Madoc thing goes back. Of course, the first versions I heard was the 1170 landing, which turns out to be pretty much completely bogus. But the 570 landing, I believe, is not only accurate, but it's supported by a whole bunch of scientific evidence, because there is definite scientific evidence of a mid-Atlantic impact at that period of time. There are chevrons of tsunami action in the Carolinas that go 24 miles inland. That was a big impact.
So because you can explain that a bit more, what you mean by the chevrons? I don't quite understand that one.
When the comet fragment or asteroid, whatever it was, when it hit in the Atlantic, it caused a tsunami.
Right, I'm with you now. Actual physical impact we're talking about. Okay.
Yes, and it had
yeah, because it's going to hit both sides of the Atlantic, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and there are also chevrons in Mauritania and a few other places along the African coast. But the chevrons are debris that was washed inland with the main wave and the secondary wave in the Carolinas. They think that wave was as much as 55 feet high when it hit the coast.
Wow.
So, and that's a low-lying coast anyway. So it just carried stuff forever. If you were in it, you were a goner. But the tale that Madoc took 10 years to rebuild enough of a fleet to go home is not entirely out of the question, especially if he ended up in the middle of that. He did not, however. He apparently ended up somehow in the Gulf of Mexico, where things would have been a little bit calmer, and entered through the Mobile Bay in what is now Alabama. And in my book, I wrote about that too.
Which book is that again? Which book is that? 'Cause you've written a couple, haven't you?
I have, but that one is called the Graves of the Golden Bear.
That's the one. Yeah. That's the one. Yes, let me get hold of that one.
Well, you'll have to get a used copy because it is currently out of print. But
yeah, I think I had a look on Amazon. It's like £200 or something. Is that because they're rarity, I suppose?
Yeah, it has. On the Australian Amazon, it hit $860 for a while, but
yeah, I did have a look. Now I remember. Now, yeah, we'll have to do something about making it available again.
I'd love to do that. I do hold the rights and everything for it, so
okay, good. All right, we can talk about that again. Yeah. So sorry, I'm just go back. So sorry to just read. So you're seeing that Madoc then. So you might have got blown inland or maybe not, but somehow he's ended up in the Gulf of Mexico, and then he's come back up through Mobile into Alabama, and then taking the major rivers to Ohio River or whichever. They all join up, don't they?
Well, that would have been his second voyage, according to what Allen has discerned from the what do they call it, Chronicles of Wales, or
Yeah, the triads and stuff.
Yes, but following the archaeology, this would have been the Madoc's second incursion, and Arthur came with him this time.
Right. Okay. Oh, we're talking about the second voyage. Okay. So you think the second voyage went to the Gulf of Mexico? Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
Right.
I think during their 10 years, they observed how hurricanes form, where they form, and what it can do to a fleet of ships. So in fact, they probably lost a couple small fleets trying to get home before they did.
I would guess, especially around the Florida area and the Caribbean.
Right. Yeah. So when you do get out of the Gulf of Mexico and into the Gulf Stream, now you've pretty much got it made, as long as you got plenty of provisions, because it's going to take you to the northern parts of the British Isles and onto Norway if you follow it. But surviving it to get out of the Gulf of Mexico is the key there. But they weren't trying to do that. They were trying to enter and colonize, because at that time, after the 570 impact, England, what is now England, the British Isles, including Ireland and Scotland and Faroe Islands, pretty much everything in the Northern Hemisphere had been affected by this impact, and it had put enough stuff into the atmosphere that the Dark Ages was not a metaphor for the inability to read and write. It was literally dark skies.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And affected crops and all sorts of famines and everything. From that,
Yes. And long in that period was the first time that the British had ever imported wheat. They'd raised wheat themselves before that. And they'd exported it to Rome. That was kind of the reason Rome wanted Britain, was its productivity for wheat and barley, because beer was very popular in Rome too.
Yeah, it was always a bread basket, wasn't it, as they call them?
Yes. So anyway, Madoc guided his brother and an entourage, depending on whether Allen's right or not, of up to 12 to 15,000 people, 700 ships, give or take, all the way to the current United States, the state of Alabama, very specifically. And in my research, I found out that when the French finally got in there in whatever it was, 1701, that's where they established their first capital of the Louisiana Territory. And the brother, not d'Iberville, who was a governor, but his brother, whose name escapes me, went on an adventure with one of the local natives to an island in the middle of the bay, and it was called the Island of Statues. It still is, incidentally. And he found statues of a man, a woman, a baby, a bear, and an owl.
Wow. Okay.
So this, to me, it indicates one of two things: man, woman, baby, and animals. This is the Trinity plus all of creation. Whether it's the Native American version or the Christian version is kind of immaterial if you're trying to safeguard your sovereignty for a national.
It's a
property.
universal story, isn't it? It's a universal story. Life.
Yes, it is. But if it could be interpreted as Christian, then the rights, the sovereignty rights of the lands of North America as they descended from Columbus would be null and void, because Columbus colonized the Western Hemisphere by right of a papal bull called Terra Nullius, empty lands, where if you found a land that had no Christians, you could take that land and you could take the people who were not Christians, which they did. Precisely what they did. And if you prove that there were Christians there before they got there to do that,
well, I'm with you now. Yes. Okay. Yes.
Their claim is void.
Yes. So
the statues from the Isle of Statues were shipped back to Paris and promptly disappeared from history.
Yeah, funny how that happens, isn't it? Things get lost.
Yeah. So the idea that Christians, because that would have been the Welsh of that period, they would have been, actually they'd have been Chaldee, not Catholic, which is even a whole different story. But
yeah.
The Chaldee probably personally knew Jesus. That's where that story starts, in Mobile Bay. Whether Madoc knew that when he got there the first time, whether he discovered it then, or whether they already had tales of, which we know they did. They called it the Fortunate Isles. They called it
what do they call it? Sorry, the what
Isles? The Fortunate Isles.
Fortunate Isles. Okay. Sorry, who is calling? They're calling Britain the Fortunate Isles, or we're talking about the Isles
North America.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, I'm just trying a lot of information here. It's great stuff. Very good. Yeah. Right. Keep going.
So Madoc and company, whether it was the first time or the second incursion, they went north. They didn't find very many people. Probably the cometary impact had affected the population levels of all continents in the Northern Hemisphere. We know that it did.
Good point. I tend to forget there'd have been an effect on that side as well, especially in the coastal areas. Yes. Yes. Very good point. Yes.
Well, in the interiors, it would have been extended winters. Instead of 2 months of cold and snow, it would have been 4 or 5 months of cold and snow. You had years without summers in Europe. And these are historically recorded. We have archaeological and other evidence, botanical, etc., in North America that this same thing happened, and in varying degrees depending on where you were on the continent. But Madoc, being at that point in time someone who was just kind of an accidental explorer, was finding out as much as he could about the place and finding ways to get home. When he did make it home, he went to his brother and he said, he went back to England, back to Britta, and he found that it was just about devoid of food and that they needed a new start someplace. So he talked Arthur into taking a colony there. He said, and there's almost nobody there. There'd be, easy to move in. It's all green. It might have been lying just a little bit at that point in time. It is all green now, but after several years without summers, it might not have been quite as good. But convinced them, they all went back. They took metal implements. I'm convinced some of those have been found, but they're not accepted by archaeology. they had other evidences of a metalworking culture in that region in that time frame. But the most compelling thing I found was the way they buried people. From about 800 up to about 800 AD along the Ohio, it was mound burials. Beginning in just after 600 AD, and you can date it moving north, up into about 800 AD, they had what they call stone box graves. It's exactly how the Welsh did it at the same time. There were, for that 200-year period, they had limestone boxes they put people in. They weren't cemented together. They weren't even sawn. They were just rough, broken, not even rough cut, rough, broken slabs of limestone to make a box. No artifacts, almost no clothing was buried with the body. Then, starting in about 800 AD, they started burying artifacts. It usually one. Usually it had a hole knocked in it. And that marks when the Maya got here, because that's how they buried people.
Okay. Because, Alan has his theory that his latest theory, which unfortunately seems to get a bit too old to follow through, is that the Welsh migrated down to Peru and became the Maya or the Aztecs. Not the general population, but the small elite population that didn't.
Yeah. In Peru, they would have become the Inca.
Yeah, Inca, yes, yeah.
Yeah, you bring up something very interesting there, because there have now been 3 skeletons found, 1 in Norway, 2 in Ireland, where the skull has what they call an Inca bone.
Okay, what's that?
It's an extra little point on the plate at the very back of your head in the occipital lobe.
And that's in Europe?
Yes.
Excellent.
And they all date from around 1100 AD, so about when the Inca came to be. So yeah, it's a very interesting coincidence.
Yeah, and I wish Alan was 20 years younger, because I'm like gripped by this Peru idea. So how far have you got with that as well? So you're saying the Mayans came? Well, I'm sure they came both ways and stuff, didn't they? I mean,
yeah.
You tell me what you think.
Well, I think that the Maya were a structured society from day one. All the archaeologists say, "Oh no, they grew out of this, they grew out of that." No, they showed up with laid out cities. All the cities laid out on a very similar grid. They had sewer systems, they had water supplies, they had all the comforts of home, including long distance communication and transport. They had 100-foot-long ocean-going canoes. They have pictures of those same canoes in their surviving art. They had books. They weren't, books the way we do them, but they were codices, and they were basically paper. It wasn't papyrus. It was, for all intents and purposes, made of tree bark, but it was processed into paper, if you will, in a similar, somewhat different from the Chinese, but using some of the same techniques. Chinese came later, after the East Indians did. But the East Indians showed up in Maya land too, and their references to elephants showed up in North America as well.
Wow.
Yes.
I'd never heard that before.
There were elephant effigies in Wisconsin and Iowa. There are elephant effigy stelae in Mayan Yucatan, not Yucatan, in Belize in that case.
So is there any chance there were elephants that became extinct in North America, or you think is that a possibility? I'm just trying to think what the
there's no
explanations are for these things.
There's no paleontological evidence of elephants per se ever having been in what is now the United States, North America. There were both Columbian mammoth and mastodons, but they're 3 times the size of an Asian, 4 times the weight of an Asian elephant. The stele that's, I think it's in Belize. Anyway, it shows, the archaeologists try to tell you it's a type of bird, but it's an elephant, and you can see its trunk curling, you can see its ears, you can see its tusks, you can see the rider on its back, both of them. And it's an Indian mahout. It's not just somebody on an elephant. It's somebody who knows how to control an elephant.
Right.
That's a whole different story by itself. But the same type of elephant that Hannibal had, incidentally. Hannibal did not have African elephants. He had Eastern elephants. He had one African elephant. It like to sunk his entire fleet. But the elephants that were in North America, in Mexico, in Belize, in Maya country, were Indian elephants, and the mahouts, the riders, were decked out in Far East Indian garb. And you can still see it in that carved stone. But the archaeologists insist that's not an elephant, that's a bird. We'll just go with that.
And the clothes are not explained, are they? That's just a coincidence.
No, they're not even addressed, let alone explained.
Or independently developed is the term, isn't it?
Yes, and if
I'm learning to hear that term a lot in these conversations.
You also very rarely come across a term called a problematic artifact or a problematic cultural remains. That's what we're talking about here. Now, I mentioned earlier.
That's the most wonderful, wonderful term. There's those two words, problematic artifact, you know? It's just great. That sums up everything, I think. I think that could be a title for a book.
Well, I have considered that one. Let me see if I can find a picture here real quick.
It's great, isn't it? It doesn't fit our narrative, so we're just going to have to ignore it or bury it or hide it or just pretend. What I usually find happens over this side of the pond anyway is that just ignore it, it'll go away eventually. You know, that's the best.
Yeah. What you mean, like the history of Wales?
Yeah, that's right. Just pretend it. Just don't argue with the people. Just ignore it. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Rick. This term, problematic evidence or inconvenient truths, whatever, is very important. And the last part of this trilogy, you'll see some shocking, that shocked me on just how a lot of this evidence has been dealt with. Has never seen the light of day. Yeah, shocking but true. There you go. So hope you enjoyed that. If you're new to Britain's Hidden History, live show every Sunday, 8 PM UK time. Loads of news, updates, what's happening with the project, and interviews, discoveries, all that kind of good stuff. You see lots of videos going up. We'll look at ancient history that's been hidden. And you can look all the way back, following the Cymry, the British, all the way back to ancient Egypt, ancient Assyria. There's a lot more on that coming up as well soon. And as mentioned in the video, there are some new books from Wilson and Blackett on the way. Where Jesus is Buried just came out. There's a book on the Comet and the after Madoc migrations very soon. So please stay in touch. Until the next, till part 3, Heddwch.